Paul Hancock. I was the Chief Fire Officer from 2009 to 2018, so 9 years. Why did I enter the fire service? It's a good question. And it could be a long story. No, I was at school and I secured a place at a Merchant Navy college to be a radio officer. And unfortunately, the grants from the county council at the time weren't forthcoming, so I ended up going back to school to finish off my A-levels. To cut a very long story short, I applied for the police and at the same time applied for the fire service. It's just the fire service came before the police, and here I am. I started my fire service career in Cumbria Fire Service up in the lakes in 1985. It seems a long time ago now, but in some respects it doesn't feel like a long time ago either. So I started as a firefighter at Workington. I was the first probationer that they'd had on the station for about 7 years. And the guy who was in charge who said to me, right, you've got your probationary period, you might as well take your exams at the same time. So that's how it really started. And after probably 2.5 years, I was about 6 months out of my probation, and the sub-officer went off on a sickness absence. And the leading firefighter at the time became the sub-officer, and the station manager at the time, the station commander, said, who wants to be the leading firefighter? And they all pointed at me for some strange reason. So I became temporary leading firefighter quite quickly, really. And then I got a substantive post as leading firefighter, and then started to move through the ranks as they were in those days. So there was never a master plan or an initial sort of desire to become a chief fire officer. It happened, really. I was encouraged. I had some really good mentors along the way, a couple of really good mentors in Cumbria and a couple of really good mentors in Cheshire as well. So, and I've always been somebody who's tried to push my own personal boundaries in terms of my development, understanding what's going on in the world. I played quite a lot of sport when I was young, so that sporting sort of ethic and dynamic was part of my character and personality, if you like. So, and winning and pushing boundaries was always part of that. And I went down to the Fire Service College in 1999 on my divisional command course, where you assigned a tutor, and they encouraged me to go for the brigade command course, and then moved around the county and picked up various roles within Cumbria, and ended up as the assistant chief in 2005, and then an opportunity came to come and work in Cheshire as a deputy chief in 2007. And then, as I say, 2 years later, 2009, I became the chief fire officer. Enjoyed every day in the service and enjoyed every day as the chief fire officer here in Cheshire as well. The chief fire officer title was always there in terms of the operational responsibility that went with being a chief fire officer for the whole service, the whole brigade, as it was called many years ago. The chief executive element of the title came a little bit later, really, and it was just to recognise that fire and rescue services, being part of local government, had local government governance linked into it. Obviously the business planning process, the risk management, developing plans, having a financial plan to go along with that. So the chief executive reflected the chief executive roles in local authority in terms of that responsibility for the corporate and the governance aspects of running an organisation. So there was the chief fire officer operational element, and then there was that head of paid service, the chief executive element that looked at the business requirements and the governance requirements for not just the fire service but for the fire authority. So I reported into the fire authority, 23 elected members from the 4 constituent authorities that make up Cheshire. Obviously there was quite a significant change in Cheshire in 2009, just before I became the chief actually. So in 2009, working with new members, developing a new business planning process, a new business model with the risk management plans we had in place at those times, to make sure that we're not only focused on the operational elements, but we were complying with all of the governance requirements and making sure that we had a really good, robust budget planning process to deliver the plans as well. So that's where the Chief Fire Officer and Chief Executive title sort of came from. When I first became the Chief in 2009, it was very clear to me and many others in the organisation we need to change the way we worked within the organisation, the culture, if you like. And I was quite fortunate that I had probably 12 months, sort of 18 months, working with a plan that was currently in place to develop that team ethos, recognising there were some challenges coming in 2011 and 12 post the 2010 general election with the austerity and the cuts to the budgets and the capital grants, etc. So that was coming, that was on the horizon. And I wanted to make sure that we had everybody, as far as possible, engaged in those discussions and in effect to determine our priorities and our journey. So it was more about making sure that individuals in the organisation, from firefighters, the advocates, the volunteers, and obviously the support staff, all the way through to the principal officer team, and more importantly, the elected members, all felt they were part of this new journey and this new challenge that we had to sort of confront in the future. So it was just recognising that I couldn't do that on my own. I needed some members who were really supportive and bought into the vision of the service. A team that was close to me to support me in my day-to-day responsibilities, but then teams that reflected the rest of the organisation, understanding the challenges, understanding the journey, and making sure that we shared those ideas and those thoughts and those challenges. So it was that collective spirit that we were all in this to try and make improvements to the service, whilst also addressing and dealing with the significant challenge. And I suppose some of that came from my sporting background, really, that you've all got an important part to play in the team, and if you don't play your part, it has an impact on the rest of the team. So it was the cultural change, it was working as a team with elected members, with everybody across the organisation, the different duty systems and the different individuals, to make sure that they were part of it, really. And that was really important to me as well. Part of the Team Cheshire ethos was engagement with people. The challenge, of course, is it's a relatively big organisation, so getting around to speak to 1,000 people has its own challenges. So I introduced breakfast with the chief, I introduced chief's question time, and I tried as much as I could to get out onto the fire stations to talk about the challenges that were coming. So it was that visible leadership, if you like. The really, really important bit where it really, really matters is the face-to-face conversation with the people. It's the whites of the eyes stuff, really, and making sure that you listen as well as just talk about what's going on. So it was probably more about listening to the individuals. And we shared that across the senior team. You know, I was very fortunate in the first 6 or 12 months as my tenure as the chief to build more or less my own senior team. And I've got to say that they were superb, you know, supporting me in taking the whole organisation forward in the right direction. So it's important to get the right people around you. You can't do it on your own. It was tough, you know, there were some really, really tough decisions to make, some challenging times for everybody within the organisation. We changed shift systems, you know, we moved people across the organisation. We moved fire engines to new fire stations that we had as part of the plan. You know, we had different ways of working with the police around the collaboration piece, with the local authorities around the public sector reform, all linked into the austerity. So the cultural narrative and how you worked with individuals inside and outside the organisation was really important for that journey. So the coalition government came in May 2010, and straight away there was a programme of austerity. So the grant we received from government was cut significantly, as was the capital grant that was cut significantly as well. So things like cash for buying fire engines, that was limited. And obviously the revenue that was for individual wages, if you like, that was cut significantly as well. So ultimately it meant fewer people in the organisation. On top of that, of course, there was the council tax freeze or council tax cap. So you couldn't offset one with increasing the council tax. So it's a bit of a double whammy, really. Having said that, you know, I think with members and with the senior team and with everybody else in the organisation, with that engagement we talked about earlier, it was really important to understand the context within which we were operating now, having to find some significant savings, but not just reduce what we were doing, to maintain what we were doing. There was a real passion from members to maintain the same number of fire stations and fire engines, but to do things a little bit differently, a little bit innovatively. And one thing, certainly reflecting back during my tenure, is that challenge of managing significant cuts to budgets and capital grants created some innovation within the service. And because of the culture that we'd created prior to that, people felt confident and comfortable with making suggestions on how we could move forward. And we picked up a lot from those discussions, which formed the first 4-year IR&P and then the second 4-year IRMP, which took us to 2018-19, if my maths is right. So for 2 4-year periods, we had some significant challenges, but we were all bought into it. Yes, some individuals had a bigger impact by those changes compared to others, but there wasn't one person in the organisation that wasn't involved or had an impact from those particular times during austerity. Somebody told me years and years ago, it was a really good saying that stuck with me for a long time really. Never be distracted by distractions. And that sticks in my head still to this day. So if something comes and tries to take you off the journey that you're on, don't let it distract you. You have to deal with it. So yeah, it was unfortunate at that particular time. We had a number of disruptions from strikes. In some respects, they were 48-hour strikes, 24-hour strikes, so we could cope with that easier than probably a strike that lasted seven days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. So it became a bit of almost an inconvenience, if you like. So we had to just stop everything and deal with that for the 24 hours, and then deal with that, and then get back to the day-to-day business. And again, the really important bit of that was the team. We had a number of individuals who worked over and above what they were supposed to be doing. We had obviously some challenges with the number of fire engines we had available. So you will always have things that will come in left field, but if you have a clear vision and the team, the organisation is bought into that vision, my belief is you can deal with those disruptions that come in because they don't disrupt you, if that makes sense. So you deal with it and you get on with it. In some respects, the inspectorate did change the way we thought about things, or the issues that we focused on. But in some respects, it didn't, because we had the peer review process before that. Before peer review, there was comprehensive area assessment. Before that, there was comprehensive performance assessments, and before that, it was back in the Home Office in the Inspectorate. So we're back to where we were probably in sort of 2002, 2003 in many respects. And I think with any inspection regime, any independent inspection regime, it gives you a different perspective. So you look at your organisation through one particular lens, and you try, well, I certainly tried as the chief, and the team tried to look at the situation from different angles. So getting out and speaking to the firefighters or the advocates or the volunteers or the cadet leaders, getting their view, to look back up the organisation was really important. So I was confident, we were confident that we had a really good understanding of what the organisation's strengths were and weaknesses were. I think what the inspectorate did was provide a clear focus on those 3 areas: the efficiency, the effectiveness and the people element. And within those headings there was the individual diagnostics that broke those headings down into some further detail. So in many ways it helped us provide a focus against the plans we were trying to deliver. So in many ways it helped, and I was always of the view that anybody could come anytime to look at what we were doing in Cheshire, and they would always see a really good, high-performing organisation, because we had everybody bought in to the journey, to the vision, and everybody was contributing to it as part of that culture, from the members on the authority all the way down through to the advocates, the mechanics within workshops, and everybody else. So it was a real good team effort. But the inspectorate provided a little bit more focus and clarity on what is it we needed to focus on, as well as delivering the plans. So CFO was interesting because I became the president in 2015. It was a conversation with a few of my principal officer, chief officer peers, probably 2 or 3 years before I became the president of CFOA, and they were sort of encouraged me to, you should put in for this, and we think you'd make a difference. So I did, and I became the president of CFOA. So it was from September 15 to September 2016, and it was great. It was a challenge because I had Cheshire running, and I also looked after Cumbria for a little while during that particular period of time as well. So it was Cumbria a couple of days a week, Cheshire a few days a week, and then the odd trip down to London to wear my CFOA hat. And I would say never underestimate how much you can push yourself mentally and physically, because for 18 months it was a really challenging time for me personally, but I enjoyed every single minute of it. With having a good team here and a good team in Cumbria, I could then do the CFOA work as well. In January 2016, the Fire and Rescue Service nationally moved from DCLG back into the Home Office. That was a few months into my tenure as the president. And what was really interesting is that they then very quickly developed what they called a fire reform programme within the Home Office. I had a number of discussions with the Minister and the Home Secretary and civil servants about where does the Fire and Rescue Service sit within the new governance arrangements, bearing in mind they had responsibility for the police at that time as well. So we tried to look at the police model and to refine the police model to make sure that we could then align that with what we were trying to achieve as fire and rescue services. It was an interesting year that certainly developed my character a little bit more, because when we got to September 2016 at the AGM, the CFOA AGM, they had to vote to move away from what was CFOA to the National Fire Chiefs Council. And a big part of that was to fund a full-time chair of the council to make sure that fire and rescue services had a voice around the table at the Home Office. And that, not just a voice that sort of pops in every now and again, it was a permanent voice around the table with the civil servants and, as I say, the ministers within the Home Office. And I think proof in the pudding now, several years on, is that seems, from what I can see, seems to be working really, really well. And we've got, I think, the Fire and Rescue Service now, through the NFCC chair, has some really good input into what's going on in the Fire and Rescue Service. And recent events have highlighted and provided evidence to support that statement. I would suggest you were seeing what was going on in the Home Office, so you could bring that back to Cheshire, so you could give them an early heads up of what was potentially coming, so the reform programme, the return of the inspectorate, and those diagnostics around efficiency, effectiveness, and the governance issue around police and fire and crime commissioners and elected mayors taking on responsibility for fire and rescue services as well. It was all part of that reform programme. So we certainly had some influence over that, and who knows, things might have been very different if we'd stayed with the old C4 model. So organisationally, the thing that stands out for me is, during my tenure as a chief, the support I got from my senior team and from the people in the organisation and the elected members. If we hadn't have had that, I don't think we'd achieved a lot of what we achieved during some very difficult and challenging times around the austerity and, the cuts, the budget cuts. I don't want to bleat on about the budget cuts because they were what they were at the time. We dusted ourselves down and just got on with a lot of the stuff, really. But that culture and that team ethos within the organisation is something that will stay with me for a long, long time, because it was really, really important. And I think, just to repeat, if we hadn't have had that, we might not have been, we would not have been as successful as we have been as an organisation. The second bit is an operational one, which is the Bosley. I was up in Preston when I got the pager message. So driving back to Bosley, I was picking up the messages and phone calls. So I knew it was a significant incident. And I think we were there, I think it was like 33 consecutive days we were deployed. And it wasn't just Cheshire, it was our neighbouring fire and rescue services, Derbyshire, Staffordshire. We had support from West Yorkshire, USAR team, Lancashire's USAR team, Merseyside's USAR team, Greater Manchester's USAR team. So for 33 days, we were committed operationally to deal with the significant explosion at the wood flour mill at Bosley. And again, just reflecting back, and this is going to sound a little bit repetitive, the thing that struck me was the togetherness of the fire and rescue services there across those different services I've just mentioned. And the work in those first two and a half weeks when we were trying to locate the individuals who sadly lost their lives during the incident, the passion, the commitment, and the just relentless desire by the Fire and Rescue Service crews, the USAR teams, was just amazing, just absolutely incredible what they did and what they put themselves through to try and locate the 4 individuals that were missing and obviously sadly perished and died as a consequence of the explosions. But then a little bit wider than that, there was the work with the police and the ambulance service, the health and safety executive, the local authority in terms of the recovery phase of that, and working in particular with the community in Bosley. So I remember, I think it was probably the 3rd or the 4th day, I went back and I turned up and there was cakes and sandwiches and crisps. Where have all these come from? It was the community. It was the local community that, again, in a really dark, sad place, the community rallied around the strength in that community, coming to support what we were doing, which was a really challenging operational incident. It was just superb. And I know there's lots of things going on in the world at the moment, but when sort of the chips are down in a community, that community spirit working with local authorities and emergency services was just incredible. And I'll hold that in my heart for a long, long time. It was a really challenging incident, sad as well, but committed for 33 days. That was a big distraction for us, and we came through really, really well. And obviously the prosecution that followed that happened as a consequence of those investigations. So real effort and commitment by a lot of individuals for which they should be extremely proud. So what makes the service special to me? It's quite simple. It's the people in the organisation. From the chair of the fire authority to all of the members, to my deputy, the ACO, the area managers, the group managers, the station managers, the management tiers, but the volunteers, the advocates, the people that run the cadet schemes on the stations, the Prince's Trust teams, all of the support services staff, the people in finance, people in procurement, governance, planning, HR. I'm going to miss somebody, I know I am, but communications. All of those people doing the job that they want to do with the passion they do. And again, during my tenure, during those challenging times, was just superb. It was special. It was really, really special. Yes, we had challenging times and we had moments where things were, I suppose, problematic and particularly challenging, but we got through it. We've just kept our vision and our focus on where we were going. We dealt with things as and when they came in, and it was that collective strength and that collective understanding of where we were going and what we were doing, and soliciting that feedback during the course of my tenure was really, really important, not just for me, but for the whole organisation. So the people.